state your name and occupation for the jury?
I'm Bill Durham. I'm a detective and polygraph examiner for the West Memphis, Arkansas Police Department.
Sorry, Your Honor. And I want to direct your attention to June the 3rd, 1993. Did you have an occasion on that date to come into contact with the defendant, Jessie Misskelley, Jr.?
Yes, sir.
All right. And did you advise him of his rights also?
Yes, sir, I did.
All right. I want to show you what's marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 84 and ask if you can identify that.
Yes, sir. This West Memphis Police Former Advice of Rights form that I filled out, which was signed Jessie Misskelley, Jr., is dated June 3rd, 1993, and the time that he signed it was 11:30 a.m.
And how did you go over that form with him?
Jessie Misskelley, Jr. was sitting beside my desk. I turned the form so that he could read it, and as he was looking at it, I read the form to him so that he could read along with me. I explained each of his rights individually, which he initialed beside each of his rights. I then covered the waiver, and he signed at the bottom.
All right. Now, you said that he initialed each right. Did he indicate whether or not he understood those rights?
I asked him individually, and he did indicate he understood each one.
Did he appear to you to be having any trouble understanding those rights?
No, sir, he did not.
And did you use any force, promises, threats, or coercion to get him to place his initials by each right or to sign the form?
No, sir.
And did you witness the form?
Yes, sir.
Your signature from it?
Yes, sir, I did.
Did you also see him sign the form?
Yes, sir, I did.
Your Honor, we would offer State's Exhibit 84.
All right, it may be received.
Exhibit to the jury, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
After advising the defendant of his rights, did you have a conversation with him?
Yes, sir.
All right. And about how long were you with him?
Approximately 1 hour.
Okay. During the course of this period of time that you were with him, did he provide you any information of substance?
No, sir, he did not.
Did you provide him any details of anything that happened in the murders?
No, sir, I did not.
The manner in which that you advised this defendant of his rights, did you do that any differently than you would for anybody else?
No, sir.
I don't have any further questions.
Officer Durham, do you have any special training in dealing with people who are mentally handicapped?
No, sir, I do not.
During this hour that Mr. Misskelley spent with you on June the 3rd, did he deny any involvement in these murders the entire hour? Or did he deny that throughout the whole time?
Yes, sir, he did.
No further questions.
Anything else?
Did you spend the entire hour asking him whether or not he was involved?
No, sir, I did not.
All right. And was the entire hour made up of asking questions?
Yes, sir.
The entire hour? Or
No, sir, not the entire hour. There was other paperwork that I completed, which took a degree of time, and no, sir, the entire hour was not spent asking him questions.
All right. During the time when you were talking to him, approximately how much time would you say was involved in actually asking him questions related to the incident?
Probably maybe half that time, probably 30 minutes.
I don't have any further questions.
Anything else?
So for 30 minutes, he denied any involvement in these homicides?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, you may stand down. You need him to stay in attendance.
Your Honor, could I have just a minute? Your Honor, can we approach the bench?
I feel like bad position. On the one hand, we can't mention. Oh, wait just a minute.
No, if we're gonna talk about this,
Yeah.
I'm retired in chamber.
Ladies and gentlemen, you can have a 10-minute recess with the usual admonition not to discuss the case. I need to use the big room back there, though, so y'all will just have the one restroom back here. But don't leave. Don't leave. Yeah, go ahead.
Barbara, she's not ready yet.
Okay, wait just a second.
Detective Durham, during this 30 minutes, Mr. Stidham has characterized the defendant as denying his involvement the whole time. Were you questioning him on his involvement the entire 30 minutes?
No, sir, it was not.
All right. What was the main focus of your questioning of the defendant?
Whether or not he was an associate of another person that we were looking at as a possible suspect, whether or not he was involved in any of these alleged cults that we'd heard about at that time.
Any of what now?
Cults.
Okay.
And whether or not he knew who may possibly have been responsible for this crime.
Okay. Were you satisfied with the responses you got?
No, sir, I was not.
Anything else?
Nothing wrong.
All right, you may stand down.
For the record, you're the same Detective Ridge who's previously testified.
Yes, sir.
Detective Ridge, I want to direct your attention to June the 3rd, 1993. Did you participate in some questioning of the defendant, Jessie Misskelley, Jr.?
Yes, sir, I did.
And were you present when Detective Allen advised him of his rights?
Yes, sir, I was present.
I want to show you what's been introduced as State's Exhibit 74 and ask if you recognize that.
Yes, sir, I do.
And did you sign that as a witness?
Yes, sir, I did.
Was any force, promises, threats, or coercion used to get the defendant to sign the form, to initial the rights, or to make any statements?
No, sir.
I also want to show you what's been introduced as State's Exhibit 104 and ask if you recognize that.
It's a subject description form.
All right, for identification purposes. And is part of that form in your handwriting?
Yes, sir.
And what part is that?
The scars, marks, and tattoos.
All right, where did you get that information?
From the defendant, Mr. Misskelley.
Your Honor, at this time we would offer State's Exhibit 104.
Hasn't this already been introduced?
It was introduced for identification purposes.
Oh, I'm sorry. No objection.
All right, it may be received without objection. Exhibit to the jury.
Before I continue on the questioning, I want to back up a minute. At the crime scene, Detective Ridge, what efforts, if any, were made to keep any bystanders from seeing the victims and the injuries they suffered?
Okay, before the bodies were actually removed from the water, everybody that was not directly concerned with the case, the detectives assigned to that case, were moved away from the crime scene and tape was put up to keep them away.
All right. And then after Michael and Stevie and Chris were removed from the water, was anything done to keep any other people that were non-police from seeing?
Yes, sir. Their bodies were covered with black plastic.
All right. Now back to June the 3rd. After Detective Durham talked to the defendant, did you have some conversations with the defendant?
Yes, sir, I did.
All right. Did somebody else have some? Was somebody else with you?
Yes, sir.
All right. Who was that?
Inspector Gary Gitchell.
All right. And during this conversation that you and Detective Gitchell had with the defendant, was any force, promises, threats, or coercion used to get him to make any statements to you?
No, sir.
Did the defendant during this time, about what time did this start, by the way?
approximately 12:40 after I'd come back from lunch.
All right. And during the time that you and Detective Gitchell were having this conversation with the defendant, did you do anything to preserve your conversation with him?
At a point, a tape recorder was...
I'm talking about before the tape recorder.
took some notes. Yes.
Okay. All right. And was there any reason why you weren't tape recording immediately?
It wasn't determined that he was a suspect at this point.
All right. And what did you think he was?
A potential witness.
As far as what type of witness?
A reluctant witness
Well, I didn't.
to the homicide or to activities of Damian Eccles.
Okay. All right. And what, if anything, did he tell you during this conversation before the tape recording in regard to anything he might know about the homicides?
Okay, he had told us that he had attended some satanic cult type meetings. He was a member of a satanic cult-like group.
What did he tell you about that?
That they had met in various parts of the state, generally on a Wednesday, generally late in the evenings, even into the night. That boys, along with girls, would attend. There would be sessions of sex, orgies, as he called them. That dogs and animals had been killed, and in fact those animals, portions of them, have been eaten by the members. He talked about some phone calls he had received
From who?
from Jason Baldwin. He says he heard the voice of Damian Eccles in the background.
All right. What did he tell you about those phone calls?
Yeah, there were 3 phone calls. One was in the day before the murders, he explained. One was the morning of the murders, he explained. One was the night after the murders that he explained.
And what did he say, do you recall, about the phone call the day before the murders?
Something to the effect that they were going to go somewhere and get some girls the next day or something to that effect.
Okay. All right, do you have your notes there?
I can probably find them.
Okay.
Yes, sir, I have.
All right. And do you have notes related to that phone call the day or night before the murders? I'm looking
Okay.
at the first page.
I'm on page 4.
I'm looking at page 1.
Okay, stated that he had received a call from Jason Baldwin the night before the murders.
Okay, and what did he tell you?
Okay, at that time they were going to go out and get some boys and hurt them.
All right. And then what did he tell you about Damien in the background?
All right, stated he received a call from Jason. Damien in the background wanted him to go with them, said they planned something, heard Damien say that Jason ought to tell that they were going to get some girls or something.
All right. And what did Jessie tell you?
Jessie said he knew what they were going to do.
All right, did he say anything in this conversation about a briefcase?
Yes, sir, he did.
All right, what did he say about a briefcase?
Okay, he said that the briefcase was something that showed up at these meetings that they would have. The briefcase contained a couple of guns, some marijuana, I believe some cocaine, and that there was a picture in the briefcase, and that he saw pictures of the boys that were killed.
All right, did he say anything about what Damien had, or any of the people had in regard to these boys?
Okay, he said that Damien had been stalking these boys or watching them.
All right, how about the, do you recall what, if anything, he said about the phone call that came the morning of the murder?
I'm not sure if it's in my notes or not, but he referred to that he received a phone call that morning, the morning of the murders, and that they wanted him to go with them.
All right, how about after dark, after the murders?
Yes, sir. He said that he heard Damien in the background and that he heard him say, we did it, what are we going to do now? What are we going to do if somebody saw us?
All right, now during the course of these conversations, or this conversation with the defendant, was anything shown to the defendant?
Yes, sir.
All right, and what was shown to him?
Okay, there was a picture that Inspector Gitchell showed him,
Okay, and what was that a picture of?
one of the victims.
I want to show you State's Exhibit 76 and ask if you can identify that.
That's the body of Christopher Byers.
All right, but the picture itself,
It's a Polaroid photograph.
is that the photograph that Inspector Gitchell, or one like it,
Yes, sir.
he showed him? Your Honor, we would offer State's Exhibit 76.
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, it may be received without objection. Yes. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, sure. Well, you've already made your record on that. Oh, you're not.
Erase everything, every issue.
Well, you don't have to re-raise it. Okay,
Thank you, Your Honor.
May I get it, Your Honor?
yes.
And what were the circumstances in which this photograph was shown to the defendant?
Okay, the defendant had been talking. He had gotten to where he had almost not been talking. He'd slowed down in giving any information, at which time Inspector Gitchell left the office and came back with this picture.
Okay, and then what did he do?
He showed the picture to Jessie.
And what was the defendant's response?
He grabbed the picture. He sat back in his seat. He became fixated on this picture. He just had it in his hands. You could tell he was tense. He just intently looked at this picture.
And then what happened?
He wasn't answering any more questions. He just, like, he was so fixated on the picture that he wasn't talking, wasn't saying anything, just looking at the picture. We had to physically take the picture away from him, or just pull it out of his hands and laid it down on the desk, and he just continued to look at the picture.
All right, and then what happened?
Inspector Gitchell actually moved the picture out of his sight, and we continued to talk to him.
All right, and all right, now at some point, did you leave the room?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, before you left the room, what else occurred?
Okay, a tape recorder with a short session was played where the defendant could hear it.
You said a short session.
I mean, just a very few words were said by a young person on this tape.
Do you know whether or not the person's voice was somebody that the defendant was acquainted with?
Yes, sir, I think he is, yes.
All right. In fact, did the defendant say something about where he had been, like the night before or something?
I was made aware of where
You
he
weren't
had
present?
been the night before.
Okay. You don't remember the defendant saying anything about that?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, what was your purpose in leaving the room?
Okay. We had just played this tape, and Jessie says something to the effect that I want out of this. I want to tell you everything, at which time we started asking him some more questions. We asked about this third telephone call. That's when that third telephone call came in, and he tells us about what Damien had said in the background. And I felt this was extremely good information, and that we were at the verge of getting a good witness. And I just decided it was time to take a break, and I wanted to inform Sergeant Allen of this information.
Now, up to this point, did you have any reason to suspect that the defendant was involved?
No, sir.
All right. Had y'all, what was the demeanor or the atmosphere when y'all were questioning?
It was mostly we were just as nice as we could be. We weren't hollering, we weren't loud. It was just as though I'm talking to you right now.
All right. Well, you said mostly.
Well, that's all. I mean, there wasn't anything except the incident with the picture that you could see there was stress.
Okay.
The incident with the tape recorder when he reacted like, I want out of this, I want to tell you everything.
Okay. Now, was there something about a circle?
Yes, sir.
All right. Was that before you left the room or after you returned?
That was before I left the room.
All right. What was that about?
Okay, it's an interrogation technique that Inspector Gitchell used. It's basically a circle that would be drawn on a piece of paper. There were dots all over the paper. Where are you in the circle? That is a question that was asked of the defendant. Are you a witness? Are you a defendant? What are you?
Okay. All right. Now, after you went out of the room, what happened next?
Okay, I was talking with Sergeant Allen about what he had told us about the telephone call and what he had heard Damien say in the background, and Inspector Gitchell came out and informed me that he had just told him he was there when the boys were killed.
Now, from that point on, how did you preserve the conversation?
Everything that was said from that point on during the interviews was taped.
All right. Now, during the portion where the conversation was tape recorded, did the defendant provide some information about some tennis shoes?
Yes, sir, he did.
All right. And were these his shoes or somebody else's shoes?
He said they were his shoes.
All right. And do you remember what kind of shoes they were?
He said they were blue and white Adidas tennis shoes.
All right. Did he say what he had done with the shoes?
Yes, sir, he did.
All right. What did he say he had done with the shoes?
He said those were the shoes that he had worn the night of the murders.
And what did he say he had done with them?
He said that he gave those shoes to Buddy Lucas.
All right. I want to show you what I've marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 95 and ask if you can identify those. You can open the bag.
Yes, sir, I can identify them.
All right. And what are those?
These are the shoes recovered from Buddy Lucas.
And what kind of shoes are they?
They're blue and white Adidas tennis shoes.
Your Honor, we would offer State's Exhibit 95.
All right, it may be received without objection. You may exhibit.
I can look at them later. I don't want to pass around tennis shoes. I don't have any further questions at this time, Your Honor.
These tennis shoes, Officer Ridge, were they sent to the crime lab for analysis?
Yes, sir, they were.
Did they come back with anything positive or anything linking Mr. Misskelley to the scene of the crime?
No, sir.
Let's talk about the interrogation on June the 3rd. At some point, Officer Allen picked up Mr. Misskelley
Yes, sir.
that morning? Brought him to the department about what time?
I think you picked him up at about 9:30.
When did you begin to?
Never mind, he's going on. Never mind.
When did you begin to take part in the interrogation?
It was about 10:30, I guess. I can look at the subject description form. The time is at the bottom of it when I walked into the room.
Okay. Now, when you walked into the room, you began to ask Mr. Misskelley questions about participation in a cult?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And did you also begin to ask him about his whereabouts on May the 5th? Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's it.
So is it safe to assume that at this point in time, Mr. Misskelley is a suspect?
No, sir.
You mean to tell me, officer, that you got him down to the police department, you're asking him where he was on May the 5th, and he's not a suspect?
Yes, sir, that's correct. He was not a suspect at that point.
So you were just bringing in everybody off the street and asking them these same questions?
He brought in very many people off the street and asking questions about their whereabouts to see if they could remember that date.
And what happens if somebody couldn't remember? Does that mean they're become a suspect, or?
Not necessarily, no, sir.
Well, tell the jury what the basis of this cult stuff is. You'd receive some information, I assume.
Yes, sir, we'd received some information that a cult-like group existed.
Okay. And did you also receive some information that Jessie had been to one of these meetings?
Yes, sir.
And where was this meeting held?
Somewhere in the area of Turl is what I understand.
Okay. Were you ever able to locate this spot?
I was taken to a spot where it was supposed to have taken place, yes, sir.
Did you find any upside-down crosses or anything that would suggest that this was a cult place, or anything? Did you find anything there?
No, sir.
Did that surprise you that you didn't find anything?
No, sir.
Now, later on, Jesse, in this story that he tells you several people that are in this cult with him. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Were you able to confirm any of these people as being members of this cult?
No, sir.
Did you ask these people whether they were in this cult?
Yes, sir, I did.
Did you also find out that some of these people that Jesse were naming were possibly enemies of his? People that he had conflicts with in the past?
I wasn't aware that he had conflicts with them, no, sir.
Was there anything found at the crime scene to indicate that this was a cult killing? Any upside-down crosses or carvings on a tree with 666? Anything that would make this look like a cult killer?
Well, sir, I'm not an expert on the occult-type killings.
Okay. Well, didn't the police department receive some information and anonymous tips through America's Most Wanted and other tips anonymously that this was a cult killing?
Yes, sir, we had received information.
So y'all were looking into that?
Yes, sir.
That angle?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so someone had told you that Damien was involved in this kind of stuff. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, sir, it is.
So is it safe to assume that Damien was your prime suspect at this point on June the 3rd?
He was one of several suspects, yes, sir.
Did you ever find any people who had ate dogs or cooked dogs or skinned dogs with Jesse, or like he said in this story that he told you?
No, and I think that would call for the officer to draw a conclusion about whether or not somebody ate a dog or not.
Now,
And I don't think
rephrase
that's
your
a proper
question. You might ask him, did he ever find anybody that he could confirm, or what have
Did you
You're
find-
asking him, you're asking him to speculate on what he did find, the way you phrased the question, so rephrase it.
Did you find anything, any confirmation whatsoever that there was a cult or Jesse was involved in a cult?
Yes, sir, I did.
And what is that?
Okay, a young man by the name of Ricky Clymer in another state that is separated
Okay,
from
I don't want
this
you to
group.
tell me what this person has said, because there may be an objection to that later on. But anybody else besides Mr. Clymer?
Yes, sir, there were other people talked to.
Now, this information about this cult meeting in Turl, you didn't find anything there?
No, sir, I didn't.
Did this person who told you about the meeting tell you about a certain individual who was there?
Yes, sir.
What was that individual's name?
A Michael Sean Webb.
Have you ever been able to determine where this person is?
No, sir, not yet.
Have you ever been able to determine whether or not he even exists?
Yes, sir, he does exist.
But you don't know where he's at?
I know that he's somewhere in Memphis.
Okay. Now, you testified earlier in a different hearing, Officer Ridge, that there was rumors in West Memphis that were running rampant that Damien was involved in these murders. Is that correct?
There were rumors that Damien was involved, yes, sir.
Okay. And those are pretty common throughout West Memphis and Marion?
Yes, sir.
Now, you stated that there was a time when you decided that it was important to turn on a tape recorder and record the information that Mr. Misskelley was giving you. Why didn't you record anything up to that point?
It wasn't discovered he was a suspect until he said he was there at the time of the murders.
And that's when you decided it was important to record all of it then?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you write down everything and every question that you asked him prior to turning on the tape recorder?
No,
In other
sir.
words, does your notes reflect everything?
Everything? No, sir, it does not.
Can you remember everything that was asked and answered?
Can't remember everything, no, sir.
Now, initially, Mr. Misskelley denied any involvement whatsoever in this, didn't he?
Yes, sir, he did.
Did he also tell you that he was roofing that day?
Yes, sir, he did.
On June the 3rd, did you make any attempt whatsoever to verify this?
On June the 3rd, no, sir.
Prior to making any other arrest in this case, did you verify that?
Before making other arrests, no, sir.
Okay. Now, Officer Ridge, the photograph that was just introduced into evidence depicting one of the boys' bodies, that was shown to Jessie?
Yes, sir.
And this was immediately prior to him admitting and telling you this story about being present when the boys were killed?
Shortly before, yes, sir.
Okay. And also this business about the circle with the dots in the middle and the dots on the outside, that happened right before he gave you this story about being present when the boys were killed?
Yes, sir.
And also this little tape recorded message from with a little boy's voice on there, that was immediately before his admitting that he was present at the scene. Is that correct?
A few minutes before, yes, sir.
Why did you guys do that? Why did you do the circle? Why did you do the tape? Why did you show him the photograph?
Your Honor, Detective Ridge has testified that Inspector Gitchell did that. I think the appropriate person to ask why somebody did something would be Inspector Gitchell.
Judge,
Well,
he was
if
there.
he knows why, I'm going to let him testify. If you really want him to answer that question, I'm going to let him do it. If he knows why,
There had to be a reason to do that.
There are times when Jesse would not be talking. He's getting slower with information. He's telling us things that are just, it's over and over the same thing. Those techniques are used to evoke a response.
So you did these things, you and Inspector Gitchell did these things to invoke a response,
Yes, sir.
invoke confession.
Invoke a response. Keep him talking.
Did it ever occur to you that Mr. Misskelley has a mental handicap?
No, sir, it didn't to me on that date.
Do you have any special training dealing with people with mental handicaps?
No, sir.
Did it ever occur to you that this was going to scare him, showing a picture of a body?
That it would scare him? I don't know. I guess he's scared into making a statement. Yes, sir.
Did you think it was going to scare him when you drew this, or when Inspector Gitchell drew this circle and made this diagram? Did you think that was going to scare him?
Not to scare him, no, sir.
Did you think this little tape recorded statement with a little boy's eerie voice saying what it said, did you think that would scare him?
Yes, sir. I thought that probably would scare him if he was involved.
And you did that to invoke a response.
Inspector Gitchell did that, yes, sir.
Tell the jury, if you would, please, about this circle.
This circle.
Can you describe it, please?
It's just a circle drawn on a piece of paper. There are dots on that piece of paper. When it's shown to Mr. Misskelley, then he was asked where on this circle he was. Was he inside with the people that everybody was looking for? Was he outside? We asked him, where was he?
And he replied, I want out.
Yes, sir.
Officer Ridge, when you testified earlier that when he looked at the picture of the boy's body, he was fixated,
Yes, sir.
kind of frozen, and just sat there and looked at it.
Yes, sir.
Is that indicative of fear?
I would think so, yes, sir.
How long was Mr. Misskelley at the station house that day?
That day, from about whenever he was picked up at 9:30, I guess, until he was arrested that day.
What time was he placed under arrest?
As far as I'm concerned, he was under arrest when he confessed to these crimes.
When he said he was present and watched Damien and Jason do it?
Yes, sir.
That's the point that you considered him under arrest?
Yes, sir.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what he told you. I guess you were real shocked because you testified at the earlier hearing that you were shocked when he told you that the little boys were killed at noon.
Yes, sir.
And why did that shock you?
I didn't feel that the murders took place at that time.
And what evidence did you have before you to suggest that?
There was a window of opportunity when the murders could have occurred, which we had found was between 6:30 on the 5th of May until 1:30, or approximately 1:30, when the bodies were found the next morning on the 6th, next afternoon.
So you knew then that the boys were in school that day?
Yes, sir.
That'd be a fair statement. And you also knew that there were eyewitnesses who placed them near their homes at 6 or 6:30?
Near their homes, yes, sir.
Okay. So you knew then that the murders couldn't have happened at noon?
Yes, sir.
Why didn't you ask Jesse about that on the tape?
He was asked about that on the tape.
When? I mean,
The
later
tape,
on during
Inspector Gitchell.
the second tape.
Yes, sir.
But you were the one doing the interrogating on the first tape.
Yes, sir.
But you didn't think it was important enough to go into that while you had the tape recorder on the first time?
Yes, sir. It's all important. It was important that we keep him talking. When you start contradicting somebody, then they stop talking.
I guess you were also shocked when you learned that Jesse had stated the boys were tied up with a brown rope.
Yes, sir.
And you knew that wasn't true.
I don't know that at some point they weren't tied up with a rope.
It's not the way the bodies were found, is it, officer?
No, sir.
After Jesse told you that he was present and watched Damien and Jason kill these 3 little boys, did you ever make an attempt on June the 3rd to verify where he was at and what he had told you earlier about roofing that day or being home that afternoon?
On that day, we took the statement and everything he had told us, and we acted on it.
I guess you were pretty happy that he had given this statement?
That's a fair judgment, yes, sir.
And there was a lot of pressure on the police department to make an arrest, wasn't there?
I'm not saying to make an arrest to solve the crime.
Pass the witness.
This business about him, about checking out his story, when you've got a person that's confessing a crime to you, do you just interrupt them in the middle of their confession and say, well, let me go out and check and see where you were that day, see if what you're telling us about where you were that day, is that correct? Do you do that?
No, sir, you can't do that.
Now, did you later, well, first of all, what did he tell you about where he was that day?
He said he had been roofing earlier that day and that he had gotten off work
At what time?
he said 5 o'clock.
All right. And did you check with the person he was doing the roofing for?
Yes, sir, I did.
You talked to him?
Yes, sir.
And did you find out that Jesse wasn't telling you the truth about how long he'd been working that day?
Yes, sir, I did find out.
In fact, what time did you find out he got off work?
12:30 that afternoon.
Now, this business about the defendant being scared, was it your perception that he was scared of you or scared of the situation he was finding himself in?
The sit-
object that calls for speculation?
Well, Your Honor, he's asking about him being scared. I think we ought to be allowed to inquire into that.
Judge, I think it's obvious what he was scared of.
Anything, Your Honor, with all speculation.
Well, Your Honor, if
Wait,
that
wait.
question calls for speculation, the question to Detective
Gentlemen, I
Ridge-
think you can argue, each of you can argue your perception of the observation of the witness that he was scared. And I think that's a question of argument, and I'm gonna let it go at that.
All right. In regard to the circle, when this circle is drawn, were there any particular number of dots inside or outside the circle?
There were dots all over the paper.
All right. All right. Do you remember how many dots were inside the circle?
Not in particular, no, sir, I don't.
Okay. Can you say whether it was? You don't have any idea.
No, sir, I really don't know.
Did you do that?
No, sir, Inspector Gitchell did that.
In regard to Mr. Stidham's question, in regard to confirming any of this satanic activity and eating dogs and that kind of stuff, were y'all ever directed to sites in the Lake Shore and Highland Park area where animal carcasses were found?
Yes, sir.
And what type of graffiti was found in that same area?
There were pentagrams, upside down crosses, writings, AC/DC,
Heavy metal type stuff?
yes, sir, all kinds of symbols.
I don't have any further questions.
Officer Ridge, you're talking about Stonehenge, right?
I'm talking about several different areas around and close to Lake Shore.
How do you know that this isn't a bunch of kids getting together and playing loud music and drinking beer?
I don't know that.
Thank you.
Would you expect to find these animal carcasses around where a bunch of kids are just drinking beer and playing loud music?
I wouldn't think so, no, sir.
And on these people that Jessie identified as possibly being involved, did you expect for any of them to admit that they had been involved in eating dogs?
No, sir.
I don't have any further questions.
Did you find out anything from talking to these people that indicate they were being deceptive with you when you asked them about their cult activity?
That they were being deceptive, just that they denied being a member.
Did you have any reason to disbelieve them?
No, sir.
So you can't prove that any of those people that he said were in this cult were in this cult, can you?
No, sir, I can't prove that.
No further questions.
I don't have any further questions.
You through with him?
No.
We'll go back to the back room again. If there is a back room, I don't know.
Now I'm suggesting we take a 5 or 10 minute recess.
That's all right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, again with the usual admonition, you may stand in recess for 5 to 10 minutes.
I'm gonna wait till we close the door. Too much racks out in the hall. Take the ridge out and neglected to ask something. In regard to the State's Exhibit 95, when did you recover those shoes from Bryn Ridge?
6/10 of 93.
June the 10th? I want to show you what I've marked for identification purposes of State's Exhibit 78, 79, and ask if you recognize those photographs.
Yes, sir, I do.
All right. And when were those photographs taken?
In Lieutenant Hester's office at the police department on 6/3 of 93.
And do those fairly and accurately portray the defendant as he appeared on the date of his arrest?
Yes, sir, they do.
Now, we would offer State's Exhibit 78 and 79.
All right.
I
Pardon?
would reject that. They don't fairly accurately depict the way he appeared on May the 5th.
Well, the witnesses indicate that's the way he appeared at the date of his arrest, and they'll be received for that purpose.
That's all, Your Honor.
Anything else?
Mr. President.
This time you can really go back there. Call your next witness.
Inspector Gitchell, would you state your name and occupation for the court?
My name's Gary Gitchell. I'm the inspector for the West Memphis Police Department Criminal Investigative Division.
Inspector Gitchell, how long have you been with the West Memphis Police Department?
19 and a half years.
Inspector Gitchell, I want to direct your attention to June the 3rd, 1993. On that date, did you have an occasion to have a conversation with the defendant, Jessie Misskelley, Jr.?
Yes, sir, I did.
And was that, who was present when you had this conversation?
Myself and Detective Ridge.
And approximately what time did you begin talking to him?
Let's see, that was approximately 12:40 p.m.
And during the course of your conversation with this defendant, initially, were you doing anything to preserve the conversation yourself?
No, sir.
All right. Was Detective Ridge?
No, sir. Not that I know of.
All right.
He may have been taking some notes.
Okay. Why were you not taking notes at that time?
Well, when I talk with someone, I usually do not like to, for the purpose, I like to key on and be able to listen and have my complete attention as to the conversation.
Now, during the course of this conversation, was there, let me ask you this way, was there a photograph showing the defendant?
Yes, sir, it was.
All right. Was there a small portion of a tape played for the defendant?
Yes, sir, it was.
And was there something about a circle?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, was that done before or after you started tape recording?
That was before we started tape recording.
And do you recall the sequence of what took place when?
During Detective Ridge and I's conversation with Mr. Misskelley, there was I hope this is right, there was the diagram, which I did, and then the picture, and then the tape.
All right. Were they one behind the other, or were things in between?
There was some in between from the diagram was the first thing. Then some time passed, and then there was the picture. Just a few minutes passed from that point to the tape.
Okay. Now, on the diagram, describe for the jury what this was, this diagram.
Okay. I'm assuming a lot of people may be familiar with a term, straddling the fence.
Mm-hmm.
And that was sort of along the lines that I was thinking when you're talking to someone that you do not feel is telling you the complete truth. Quit straddling the fence. Be on one side or the other. I did something a little different in so much as I drew a circle and I had several dots within that circle and several dots outside.
Okay.
And I asked, which side is he going to be on this outside or the inside?
All right. Now, who's inside the circle?
No one in particular, no one named, but I indicated that law enforcement was on the outside of the circle.
Right. In general, what was on the inside?
In general, just who was responsible for these crimes.
All right. When you did this diagram, did you say these dots inside represent a particular named individual or individuals?
No, sir.
All right. And what did you do with the circle and the dots?
Afterwards, or just pretty much like I did then, just did it on a piece of paper and that was it.
All
and
right.
Of course, showed that to Jesse because he was right there.
All right. And when you showed it to him, what happened? What did you do?
He immediately said that he wanted to be on the outside of the circle with the law enforcement.
Okay. And then I take it you had some more conversation.
Yes, sir.
And then what took place?
Short time later, I stepped out of the room.
Before you, is that when you got the picture when
Yes,
you stepped
sir.
out of the room? Okay.
I stepped out of the office that we were talking to Jesse in, and got this picture. And then also I remembered a recording of a phrase, just only a phrase, I believe probably a 4 to 5 second phrase within that recorded statement that I wanted to play for Jesse.
All right. And the voice on this tape, without naming names, how old a person was this on the tape?
8 years old.
Okay. And are you aware of whether or not the defendant knew the person whose voice it was?
Information that we had was that he is familiar with the 8-year-old boy.
All right. Now, when you came back in the room, I want to show you State's Exhibit 76 and ask if you recognize that.
Yes, sir. This is the photograph that I showed Jessie. It has the number 3 on the front of the photograph, and on the back it's number 107.
Okay. And what was the response to the photograph?
When I showed Jessie this photograph, he took it into his hand, and he just went back in his chair like this, and he just locked in on it, fixed in on the photograph, and just kept staring at it and staring at it. And I could tell that he just was, I didn't know how long he was going to do that, so I took it from his hand and set it on the table that we were working on.
Okay. And then what happened?
Briefly, just a few minutes after that, of course, I had the tape, which I do have that tape with me at this time, and
Your
I
Honor,
played a small portion of that tape.
And we would ask permission to play that portion of the tape.
Be permitted to do so.
This may take a little, problems I have.
Nobody knows what happened but me. Now that's all.
Should I do that again, Your Honor?
I think so.
Nobody knows what happened but me.
Okay, what did he say for the jurors that didn't pick it?
He said, nobody knows what happened but me.
Okay. All right. And when you played this tape, what was the defendant's response?
He immediately stated that he wanted to tell us about it at that point.
All right. And at some point thereafter, did Detective Ridge leave the room?
Yes, sir, he did.
All right. And while Detective Ridge was out of the room, what took place?
At that point, Jessie indicated to me that he was present during that time that the boys were murdered.
Okay. Now, was there, had there been some statement, or what statements, if any, did the defendant make in your presence about having been at the scene?
He had stated earlier that he had been at the scene, that also that he had gone back to the scene.
All right, you said gone back. Were those his words?
Yes.
All right. Did he say that before or after he admitted being there when it took place?
Let's see. That may have been before.
Okay.
It does get a little confusing even for me.
All right. What did he say about when he went back to the scene?
That he went out into the woods where this occurred, the murders, and he sat out and cried.
All right. And after he admitted to you that he had been there, or I may be jumping ahead of myself, tell me again what he said to you while Detective Ridge was out of the room.
That he was present when the boys were murdered.
All right. And after he admitted to you that he was present, what was the defendant's response?
Basically, I stopped him at that point.
All right.
And then I wanted to make sure it was obvious at this time we had more than just a person that we were trying to get information from as to other parties. It was obvious to us that we had a person here that was involved.
Was there any kind of emotional response?
From Jessie?
Yes.
Well, he was emotionally upset. You could tell that. It was emotional time for myself also.
All right. When you say it was emotional for him and you could tell it, what told you that?
Well, he had tears coming down his eyes.
All right. had y'all yelled at him or been mean to him or
No, sir.
threatened him or promised him anything, done any of those things?
None of those things happened whatsoever.
All right. Now, after he admitted to being there, what did you do in order to preserve the conversation?
Okay, I instructed that Detective Ridge, I went out to the room and said, we need to get a tape recorder, this is the identical tape recorder that was used. The tape recorder was brought into the room, myself and Detective Ridge. At that point, we advised him of his rights for the third time that day.
All right. Now, before you go on, I want to hand you what I've marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 75A and ask if you can identify that.
Yes, sir, this is a typed transcript of that taped interview.
And does that transcript fairly portray what is said on the tape?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, we would offer 75A, and we would. Do you have the tape too, by the way?
Yes, sir. I believe your table has the tape.
Oh, that's it. Let me show you what's marked State's Exhibit 75 and ask if you can identify that.
This package is one in which I did fill the information out on this package. It has the date on it, the case file number, Jessie Misskelley Jr., stating that this is the original tape, and it has Ridge and Gitchell were the interviewers of that. And this tape is also marked on the outside.
And is that the tape of your conversation from the time that Jessie first admitted that he was present up until there was a break?
Yes, sir.
All right. Your Honor, we would offer State's Exhibit 75. All right, it may be received. Your Honor, on 75A, was that admitted?
No, that's just the front page of the transcript.
That's the transcript. The aid and assist the jury as they listen along. I've got copies for them all.
No, may approach the bench. We want to object to the statement being introduced into evidence because we think it's involuntary.
Well, you've already made that objection.
We don't waive.
Well, you don't waive that objection. You're not waiving it. I'm going to allow you to do it in the manner you're going to have to collect the copies, and one copy will be received in evidence, and you may.
Your Honor, may I distribute it to the jury?
Yes, you may.
This is Detective Bryn.
That one. This one is ours.
Thank you.
Your Honor,
Well, that'll be all right if he wants to stand down there and put it there. I think this one is an amplifier.
Yes, this one is
Having to
also.
hold it. We'll put it up there and you won't have to hold it.
probably don't need it like that close, do you?
Interview time is 3:18.
All right, Inspector Gitchell, in the tape, there's a place where there's some reference to some pictures from a newspaper.
Yes, sir.
All right. What was going on then?
He was naming or attempting to name the boys as far as the injuries, and at that point we had a picture that was, I believe, either on the wall or on the table. It was a copy of a newspaper article. I don't recall which paper, but I believe I retrieved that, and possibly the court reporter has that picture.
Anyway, what did you do with it?
He was pointing out which boys and which one had what damage done to the boys.
All right, well, I noticed on the tape that Detective Ridge says something about, he's asking about which boy did he hit, and it says the third picture, and says
Yes,
Michael.
he was pointing to the one. He'd say, like, well, that third one or this one. He was pointing to them.
All right.
And that's why Detective Ridge went ahead, and then after he pointed out those names, he read the caption underneath that picture at that time.
All right, well, what I'm referring to is after he's, see, this may be before he read the caption, Detective Ridge referred to the newspaper article and asked which one of the three boys is it that you say Damien hit, and then he says the third picture, which will be Michael, and then you say this boy right here, and then he says yes, and then you say that's Byers.
Mm-hmm.
What was happening there?
He named one boy, but what he did, I believe he named the incorrect boy as far as their names. He picked out the right boy who was castrated. He picked out the right boy, but he called him by the wrong name.
All right, well, let me... You recognize that?
Yes, sir. This is the photostatic copy that I mentioned.
All right, I want to refer you to page 4 of the transcript of Exhibit 75A. And this is before we get to the part about the castration. It begins right here. If you could just read that over to yourself.
Okay.
All right, and I note that apparently Stevie was in the middle. Is that
Yes,
correct?
sir. That's correct.
All right.
Stevie Branch.
What was going on with in that particular sequence right there?
All right. What he mentioned was, he said the third boy. You count 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
And he mentioned the third boy and pointed to this boy, and that was in response to the question of the three boys that you said Damien hit, and he points to the Byers boy. And at that point, that's when I wrote first and then Damien above that picture.
Okay.
And then he went on through.
All right. Your Honor, I suppose we ought to make that an exhibit.
Party may be received.
That will be exhibit 104. Which one's that one number?
76.
$105. For the And for the record, it'll be State's Exhibit 105 on the gray sticker. Now, when the defendant is telling you about these injuries, is he gesturing in any way or demonstrating anything?
Yes, sir. In particular about the Christopher Byers, when we asked where he was cut, and at that point he was pointing like here, pointing to himself, and that's where it's hard to see someone pointing on cassette tape. So that's why we mentioned, are you speaking of the groin area?
Or is that after he said at the bottom?
Yes, sir.
Okay. right, now what time did this, the tape recorded session end?
It was completed at 3:18 p.m.
Now, after the tape recorded session ended at 3:18 p.m., did a period of time elapse and then you went back and talked to the defendant some more?
Yes, sir, it did.
All right. Let me ask you this. Between the time, was the follow-up conversation recorded also?
Yes, sir, the follow-up was.
Between the time when you ended at 3:18 and you started the follow-up, did you have any conversation with the defendant that was not tape recorded?
No, sir, I did not.
All right. All right, in the tape also there was some reference to him going out and with a camcorder and showing things. Why was that not done?
Well, during that time, there was a very large media coverage of that area, of the police department. Many times my investigators would go out and they were pretty much followed. So for security of the case, we felt it would be better not to take Jesse to that location because we knew he would be seen and that could hinder any chances we would have upon making arrest on other suspects. Also in the tape recorded conversation, the defendant mentions Jason Baldwin and the clothes he was wearing. I want to show you State's Exhibit 99 and ask if you can identify that. Yes, sir, this is a picture of Jason Baldwin.
Wait, just don't show it yet.
Right.
Does it fairly and accurately portray the defendant at the time of his arrest?
Yes, sir, I took that picture.
We would offer State's Exhibit 99.
All right, it may be received.
Judge, I don't think it's relevant.
Overruled.
What does it fairly and accurately depict?
The defendant's appearance at, the defendant Jason Baldwin's appearance at the time of his arrest.
Your Honor, what does that have to do with this case?
The defendant has said, Your Honor, that Jason Baldwin was one of the people involved, and I think the jury ought to be able to see his appearance. Also, Your Honor,
I allowed it into evidence.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I exhibit to the jury?
Yes, you may. Don't question me again.
Your Honor, I never got a chance to respond.
But if you want to state an objection, I'll allow that, but don't ask me to respond to a ruling. All right?
Yes, Your Honor.
You want to make an objection?
I'd like to make an objection for the record, Your Honor, to
All right.
preserve the record.
Well, hold the picture just a minute. Go ahead.
Your Honor, he asked the statement that Mr. Misskelley gave. The question was, what was he wearing on May the 5th? What he's wearing on June the 3rd, the date of his arrest, has no relevancy whatsoever. And I wasn't trying to be improper to the court. I was just trying. I never got a chance to respond before Your Honor admitted it.
All right, approach the bench. The relevancy here of the picture is not, and I didn't understand you to say what was he wearing on June the 5th. Is that what you said?
No, in the tape he says
What he did wearing, and then you asked him to identify that picture, and you said that's what he was wearing on the date of his arrest. Is that the way it went?
That's what I was trying to do.
Okay. Well, the relevancy, it should be quite obvious that if it corroborates Jesse is saying in his statement, then it is somewhat relevant evidence as to what the boy was wearing. Clothing of similar nature and type. Also, it could be relevant as to. I think I know what you're getting at. Is there something that? Yeah, sure. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you may stand in recess for 5 to 10 minutes with the usual admonition not to discuss the case.
Man, step down.
Yeah.
Gitchell, after you ended the tape at 3:18, at some point later was I summoned to the police department?
Yes, sir.
And after I got there, at my request, did you have some further conversation with the defendant?
Yes, sir, I did.
All right. And was this conversation tape recorded as well?
Yes, sir, it was.
I want to show you State's Exhibit 77 and ask if you can identify that.
Yes, sir, this is the envelope which I marked Jessie Misskelley, showing that this is a follow-up tape taken after the first confession.
And I want to show you also state what I marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 77A and ask if you can identify that.
Yes, sir, this is a transcript of that tape.
Your Honor, we would offer State's Exhibit 77 and 77A and ask permission to play the tape and distribute copies of the transcript to the jury.
May be received subject to the previous rulings of the court.
Hang on one minute. Oh, I think I do. All right. Inspector Gitchell, when Jessie said, after you'd asked him about how they would force him to do this, and he said he was holding him like this, by his head like this and stuff, was Jessie doing anything to demonstrate?
Yes, sir. He was demonstrating to me they were holding the boys by their ears and forcing oral sex.
All right, that's why he was showing you?
Yes, sir. By the ears and pulling down.
All right, in the tape, there's obviously places where you stop the tape recorder. What happens then?
I stopped the tape to walk out of the room to confer with you.
Okay. And from the time that you first started taping any of the conversations with Jessie at 2:44 p.m. until you completed the follow-up conversations with him, were there any conversations that you or anybody else had with the defendant that were not tape recorded?
No, sir. We did not talk with him whatsoever.
All right, between the time that the original tape ended at 3:18, well, first of all, approximately what time did the follow-up conversations begin?
It was probably around 5, maybe a little bit before.
Between 3:18 and 5, what were you and your men doing?
I had ordered some food for everyone, and I believe Jessie was also eating himself.
All right. And you doing anything else?
Well, we were in preparation for getting papers together, copies for getting affidavits and warrants.
Okay. I don't have any further questions at this time.
Dan, you asked to reserve your cross-examination until tomorrow morning.
That's correct, Your Honor.
I'll permit that.
May he step down?
Yes, you may stand down.
Tabitha, would you state your name and where you live for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury?
My name is Tabitha Hollingsworth and I live in Marion,
All right. What part of Marion do you live in?
Lakeshore.
Lake Shore? Okay, the best you can, you need to speak up. Are you scared? All right, don't be scared, okay? How old are you, Tabitha?
17.
All right. And I want you to go back to May the 5th. Do you remember going somewhere with your mom and some other of your family members that night?
Yes.
All right. Where did y'all go?
We was going to pick up my grandmother from work to take her home.
All right. And where does she work?
She works at a laundromat in West Memphis.
In West Memphis, okay. And how do you go to get to where your grandmother is?
We go down by Love's and Blue Beacon and all that.
All right. Do you go on the interstate or the service road?
Interstate.
All right. And who all was in the car with you?
It was me, my dad, my brother, my sister. We was all in the car.
Okay. And do you remember about what time this was?
About 9:30.
Okay. And on the way to get your grandmother, did you see somebody that you knew?
Yeah.
Who'd you see?
I seen Damien and Dominique
All right.
walking.
All right, who's Dominique?
Dominique too lives out there where I do.
All right. What does she look like?
She's got red hair. It's long.
Okay. And that night, what was Damien wearing?
He was wearing black pants and a black shirt.
All right. And what color clothes was Dominique wearing?
She was wearing some black pants that kind of had flowers on.
All right. And what about a shirt?
Black.
All right. And was there anything about her pants? What was the condition of the pants?
It had holes above the knees.
Okay. All right. And what about the condition of the clothes of both of them?
They was kind of muddy.
All right. And where did you see them?
Beside Blue Beacon. They was right before you get there. They was walking down the road.
They was where now?
They was right beside Blue Beacon. That's what it was.
All right. And okay. I don't have any further questions.
No questions, John.
All right, you may stand down. Any reason to keep her in attendance?
No.
You're free to go.